It's really a pleasure for me to present part of my research on textile development and transmission along the Silk Road. Textile can be perceived as a sort of Rosetta Stone that need to be decoded. To understand the textile, we need to take into account not only pattern and motif and the structure, but also the fiber and color. We need to analyze it not as a sort of painting, but as a sort of tridimensional composition. For those like me that deal with the Silk Road, most of the time it is a job itself to match Eastern and Western terms and historical events. But the decodification of a textile can lead us through the development and the recodification in different geographic areas and tell us more about cultural and artistic interaction. As I said, to understand textile, we really need to understand the structure. I don't want to overwhelm you with over-technical detail, but I need to introduce some basic technical detail about textiles. So a textile is made with a set of warp, so the vertical thread, and weft, the horizontal thread that generally create the pattern, but not always. The three basic structures created all the other textile compounds in the world. And these are the tabby, the twill, and the satin. The tabby is also called plain or basket weaving. The twill, to give you an idea, is the one to create jeans. And the satin is the later one, the latest one, that was created around the 12th century. That actually 10th century, much earlier, and around the 12th century was used to create a damask. Probably you are familiar with the word damask. Damask was created probably around the 12th century in Damascus, Syria, allegedly, and in Chinese it's called duan. Now, we have a problem with textile terminology in Chinese, the Chinese textile terminology, because in Chinese, normally, if you read any book of Chinese art that includes textile, you will learn about this term that is Chinese damask. But Chinese damask is a wrong translation, like Chinese brocade, and I will explain why in a second. Chinese damask are those that in Chinese, proper Chinese character, are called qi or ling, and are normally referring to a sort of damask, but not made in satin, but made in tabby and twill. So for us, these are not exactly damask. The same happened with brocade, and I will explain this in a second. This is a sort, just to give you an idea, about a Chinese damask that is very popular, also produced today. The Chinese brocade generally referring to any pattern textiles, and in Chinese are normally recorded as jin, and are the textile that I will present today. I also want to mention that I will focus more on silk than other fibers. So, silk has always been primary sources for China that over the century was used not only to cover the body, but also as a form of money to pay the army, the enemy, as a sort of tribute, a gift, and was sent to foreign countries, also to enemies, and also used to create religious items or items for the afterlife. The two oldest fragments of silk were discovered in Yinyang County, Henan province, dated to 3630 BCE, and Huzhou, Zhejiang province, dated to 2750 BCE. However, just last year, a team of Chinese archaeologists has analyzed the soil of 3 tombs in the Neolithic site of Jiahu in the Henan province again, proving the existence of sericin, the protein of silk. This discovery had to make us reconsider the domestication of the Bombyx mori, the silkworm, and the production of silk that has now been traced back of 3,500 years than before, dating it to 8,500 years ago. And these are the three skeletons where the sericin protein were found. My study that, as Margaret said, will be published by the University of Hawaii Press next year, discusses specific type of textile imagery that develop in Central Asian areas, and particularly the transmission from the Tarim to the Mediterranean basin. There are three main areas of contact that since antiquity have shared similar or identical cultural and artistic characteristics: the Trans-Himalayan, the Trans-Caucasian, and the Trans-Mediterranean areas. These three areas are along the ancient Silk Road, are those that really have a common textile iconography tradition, and that really share artistic common ground, a sort of artistic common ground somehow. And in this Eurasian area, also North Africa is included. There are three main periods of interaction that I will discuss today, and are the Han dynasty, during the Han period, the Tang dynasty, and the Mongol period. However, just for the sake of clarity, I cannot avoid to briefly mention the mummies of the Taklamakan Desert in Xinjiang province, mainly discovered along the southern Silk Road, but also in another cemetery like Astana. Here is the number 6 on the map, along the northern Silk Road. So due to the dry climate of the Taklamakan, today we have a very well-preserved group of naturally mummified people, partially Caucasian, who traveled or lived in the area already in 2000 BCE, and also that preserve for us the clothing all made in wool, so not silk. Among the most important mummies, I just want to show you a couple of them. The churchman that probably died around 1000 BCE, and the beauty of Xiaohe that was discovered with another 15 mummies, and she was preserved in a boat-shaped coffin, and is 4,000 years old. Now, as you can see, the churchman is actually 6.5 feet tall, has red hair, and is covered with a kaftan made of woven, kaftan, while the beauty of Xiaohe is wearing a hat, a pointed hat, like the type that is still produced today in Kazakhstan and also Xinjiang. Recent DNA tests have proved that many of these people migrated from southern Siberia, so not really from the west. And then there is another important cemetery, that is the Shampul or Shampula cemetery, that has provided us with a group of wool tapestry skirts, part of which are now in the Abeck Stiftung, Abeck Foundation in Switzerland, depicting camels and also with creatures. And then a most famous fragment with a Greek man and a centaur, which linked to the presence of Greek communities in Bactriana or Afghanistan that arrived probably early with Alexander the Great, and that proved the earliest influence of Hellenistic and then Roman art and iconography in Asia. We know also that both the Chinese and Iranian empires had to deal constantly with the nomadic population that harassed them from the northern steppes, and that with whom both empires also exchanged costumes and techniques and also habits, actually. Nomadic population used pens for riding horses, and most likely the Chinese acquired this custom from them. Among the greatest discoveries, there are the most recent one of 2 pairs of pants from Yanhai, not too far from Turfan along the Northern Silk Road, dated to about 3,300 years ago, which have been proved to be the oldest pants in the world so far, made not with a single piece of fabric, but 2 separate straight-fitting legs and a wide crotch with a reinforcement for riding horses. And then there is the Pazyryk carpet that is still today the oldest carpet in the world. The carpet was discovered with many other carpets and items, but made of felt, in the Altai Mountains, in the frozen noble tombs. The Pazyryk, however, unlike the other carpet found in the tombs, was made with 3,600 symmetrical double knots per square centimeter, a type of knot that today is known as Turkish knot and differ very much from the Persian knot that normally characterize beautiful silk carpet. If we look at the iconography of the Pazyryk carpet, we can see different rows of design and patterns. We can see a square with beads and griffins. We can see stags, this kind of stars, a procession of horse riders. But there is one pattern in particular that is this kind I call star, but that trace to a motif from the Middle East or West Asia, and in particular to the one carved on a stone from Nineveh, present Iraq, that was an Assyrian city abandoned in 612 BCE. This pattern also appears in the grammable ornament dated to the 19th century, 1868 to be precise, by Onjans, and is recorded as an Assyrian or Persian pattern. So I have mentioned at the beginning of this lecture that we can divide interaction between East and West in 3 main periods that coincide with the 3 periods of peace established in China during the Han, the Tang dynasties, which is recognized and called today Pax Sinica, a term that has been modeled after the Pax Romanica established by the Roman Empire between the 1st century BCE and the 2nd century CE, and also then during the Mongol period with the Pax Mongolica or Tartarica in the 13th century. According to the legend, now talking about silk, a Chinese princess was sent as a bride to the king of Khotan along the southern Silk Road, and she smuggled a silk cocoon in her hair, breaking the silence about the production of silk that until that moment had been secretly preserved by the Chinese. Khotan is indeed one of the first places that began to produce silk in the western regions, and that still today produce beautiful weavings. We have one visual evidence of this account. A votive tablet from a Buddhist shrine dated to a later period and preserved in London, which tell us about the Chinese princess. We can see a woman pointing to the crown of the princess, between them a possible basket of silk cocoons. Behind the princess we have a weaver, probably with a simple loom and a comb like the one of the many found during the archaeological expeditions, and between the two an Iranian dressed god that is generally recognized like the god of silk, but today we know that we generally, if you speak with Chinese people, they recognize a goddess, rather a female deity rather than a male deity. So without a doubt, to date we have discovered a large number of silk fragments and silk items from tombs. And starting with the Han period, we have 2 main types of textiles that we found. One is the warp phase compound. That means that this textile employed 2 sets of warp and 1 set of weft. It's basically made like a sandwich, and it means that the pattern was created through the warp rather than the weft, so vertically. And then we found the weft face compound, the substitute, the first one, and they most likely arrived from the West that employ two sets of weft and one warp. Again, like a sort of sandwich, but in this case, the pattern is made horizontally. In Chinese, these are both called jin. Again, it's a very misleading term. But the second type, the weft face compound, became extremely popular, especially in the 8th, 9th centuries, and very popular also in Europe. And today we recognize it as takete or samit if the structure is made in a tabi or in a twill. There are two main cemeteries where many hand textiles were discovered. One is Nia and the other one is Lowland. We no doubt one of the most popular type of textile created during this period is a composition of sort of Chinese clouds with weird creatures, planets that are these dots, and Chinese character, with 5 basic colors. This type of textile was very popular in some variation during the Han period, and we found it also in other places along the Silk Road. One is in southern Siberia. Here is like the border of a quiver, funerary quiver, dated to the 3rd, 4th century BCE. Another interesting piece is this one combined with another hand textile. This is a sleeve. So it's a kaftan sleeve, and this is particularly interesting because here you can see a bee, a jade bee, like one of the types that you have in the Asian Art Museum here, and even more interesting, these female figures that really connect to the Mother of the West in the monetary same period in the Asian Art Museum. Also, a similar fragment with a combination of creatures like those from Nia and Jade Bee has been found in Palmyra in Syria. The piece is one of the very rare Chinese textiles discovered in Palmyra that confirm the exchange between the Roman Empire and the Han Dynasty. The second piece discovered in Palmyra is a very tiny fragment, is a red plain ground with embroidery from the Temple of Bel, destroyed by ISIS in 2016. I don't know how many of these fragments survive today, honestly, in the Palmyra Museum of Art. So as I told you, the transmission, however, occurred in both directions, and in China we found whole fragment with the Roman-style pattern like this one that generally shows grape wines, cherubs, and other Roman or Hellenistic motif. Among the most famous of this type that we have today, there is the without a doubt, is the Yimpa Man kaftan. So the Yimpa Man is another mummy discovered in Yimpan cemetery. Is incredibly preserved, and as you can see, is wearing a golden mask that is basically a Greek tradition, or whatever remained of a golden mask. You have only the golden leaf on the forehead. And a beautiful robe, again in wool, in weft face wool, with cherubs and Roman and Hellenistic motif. Now, we don't know who he was, and looking at the well-preserved kaftan made with this composition, we might think that he was someone from the Eastern Roman Empire, but a recent analysis of the fiber has confirmed an Eastern production. This leads us to a different conclusion. Possibly, in fact, the Yimpa man was a merchant, maybe a Sogdian merchant, that traded between East and West. And it also means that workshops producing this type of textiles, copies of the Western weft face compound, had already been established between Sogdiana and the Western region of China. So as we can see, looking at this latest fragment in wool, the weft face compound, so the one with 2 weft and 1 warp, seems to be a Western technique that was brought to China and then used to create silk weavings. One of the oldest pieces of this type, indeed, is a fragment from Syria dated to the same period, now in the Philadelphia Museum of Art. So what happened after the Han Dynasty? China experienced a period of instability and was ruled by various foreign people until the establishment of the Sui dynasty for a short period, and then a new golden age with the Tang dynasty from the 7th to the 10th century. It was also in this period that Buddhism became popular and that the empire expanded its territorial border westward. There are two main sites that I really need to mention today because are two sites where really we can find beautiful textile fragments and also textile items. One is the cemetery of Astana that I mentioned before, and the other are the caves of Dunhuang. From Astana, we have especially figurines on non-Chinese peoples, completely dressed with the real textiles, and images of the Tang ladies and accessories, such as the shoes with small rosette, like the type also depicted in the royal Tang tomb near the modern city of Xi'an. The Dunhuang caves, as you probably know, are considered the Sistina Chapel of the desert. In cave 17, many documents in various languages were discovered, together with silk banners, sutra covers, silk paintings, and other items made of textiles. Unfortunately, I have no time to cover all the textiles discovered in situ, but I want just briefly show a type of banner made with recycled textiles that is also represented in painting. Here we have Avalokiteshvara as guide of soul, who is holding a triangular banner, as you can see. Like the type produced and found in the caves during the Tang dynasties. This is just one of the many. This material today is in London, mainly in the British Museum and Victoria Museum, something also in New Delhi, and some other pieces at the Museum Guimet in Paris. The banner is particularly interesting because it is made in the shape of a human body, with the head, arms, and legs supported by bamboo materials. Another place that disclosed some interesting and very different textile material, now in the Museum of Asian Art in Berlin, that I analyzed in 2012 in Kizil, and also other is Kizil, and also other caves around Turfan. The pieces are very different from those discovered in Dunhuang. There is one item in particular that I think is important to see, and is this kind of pennant, triangular pennant. As you can see, it is depicted around the bed of what remained of a Buddha in Paranirvana. This is one of the paintings, as Monica Zinn mentioned last Friday, that was destroyed, unfortunately partially destroyed during the Second World War. So the interesting thing about this pennant, the fragment itself, is that measure and is exactly of the same size of the one painted on wall. This pennant is also found as ornament or decorative motif, as you can see, in a wooden element, architectural wooden element from the caves as well. So how were these textiles used in the caves? As I previously mentioned, textile was used as a form of money or a gift. Many monks were compensated or gifted for their praying and for their service to build and paint the caves temples for the local aristocratic families, possibly also with textiles. So, moreover, from the document discovered in Dunhuang, we know that when a monk died, the monastic community organized an auction with the belongings of the deceased, including his clothing and accessories. This wall painting shows very well a group of monks in front of a box containing textile clothes, possibly monastic robes. But there is one textile and one pattern, I believe, in my opinion, that really represent the Silk Road. They began to be produced during the Sui dynasty, between, again, Sogdian and Xinjiang and also Gansu, and became very popular during the Tang and was reproduced during the Mongol period. It is a randle enclosing an animal or a pair of animals that stand on the pedestals, and normally these randles includes beads, so it's called beaded randle or beaded medallions or pearl randles. But it's also recognized as a Sassanian randles, referring to the last pre-Islamic Iranian empire of the Sassanian that lasted from the 3rd to the 7th century. This type of pattern was most likely produced, as I said, in Sogdian, and I will explain why. That was an eastern colony of the Sassanian Empire. The original one was created with a randle of beads, as I said, but we can find it also with some variations, such as with points or lobes or leaves, and most of the time in the weft face compound. But sometimes we can find also other variation in wool, like this one with the boar head, or on a playground embroidered. So in the first one is from Cleveland Museum of Art, is a tapestry, and the second one is an embroidery play silk. We no doubt the Buddhist caves again have confirmed the production and the iconography of these textiles. The same compound were used in fact for religious and like clothing and items. And as you can see here, this kind of motif, this type of randle appear on the robe of the Tokharian knight from Kizil, as a tile, again a boar head from Bamiyan, as a pillow of a Buddha, as the skirt of a bodhisattva. But there is one pair of animals that seems to be one of the most popular that was excavated or found in the tomb and enclosed in randles. A pair of facing stags standing on a pedestal. These two fragments are very similar but not identical, as you can see. One shows a randle of beads and the other a lobed randle. Interestingly, the stags are identical, but with some differences. We have some different detail in their bodies. So in the first pair, we have a couple of 4-leaf clovers or rosettes, and in the second, 2 small circles, one with beads a bit larger and another one small. This can be seen as a simplification of the sun and the moon that, as I argue, trace back to the stag of the Pazyryk carpet, which is depicted with internal organs and bones. The 2 silk pieces are a combination of early medieval patterns from the West that somehow were associated with local components and technique in silk. We can find multiple combination and variation of these small details, like also the grape or the rosette, which interestingly appear repeated also on the Byzantine mosaic ceiling in Hagia Sophia in Istanbul, dated to the 6th century. That is also the time when the Byzantium most likely began its own production of silk. It is likely, indeed, that through the Sogdian people, the middlemen or the merchant of the Silk Road, Chinese acquired textile from the Eastern Roman Empire or from the Sassanian Empire that was its neighbor. And we can read in the 68th chapter of the Shu, or the history of the Sui dynasty, and I quote, "Persia presented to the emperor a beautifully woven gown of jin in golden thread. The emperor ordered Hecho to reproduce it. He began to weave and succeeded in the making of a type even more beautiful than the one sent as a gift. The emperor was extremely satisfied," end of quote. Until that moment, the Chinese, however, had not woven a textile in gold, and we had to wait until the Tang period to find the first golden weaving. But are these textiles Sassanian? Why is this pattern, the beaded randle, accepted as a Sassanian? To answer this question, we need to look at both Eastern and Western sources. In Chinese sources, such as in document from Dunhuang again, the word fanjin, foreign pattern textile, and hujin, barbarian pattern textile, refer to textile woven in the western region imitating Central Asian and in particular Sogdian types. Both differ from the hanjin, Chinese pattern textiles produced in central China. Again, another document from the 10th century mentioned a type of textile called shashashanjin, a pattern textile from the north of Bukhara, probably Zandana. Since we don't have Sassanian historical texts, we have to look at early 10th, 11th century Arabic and Persian historical sources. Some refer to textile with randals as parniyan or parand. In the language of ancient Persian, Abu Mansur explained that Parinyan is a silk from eastern Turkestan which has pattern in randals. The decoration seems to record also coins, dinar and drachmas, as suggested again in a panegyric by Gorgani from the same period, or the stars of the Byzantine Empire, as in a poem by Abul Kazem. Again, a textile with a blue ground and white dots seems to have been preferred for its frequent recollection of the celestial vault. The two terms are also found in Arabic form barankan, a word borrowed and transliterated from the Pahlavi and the Sogdian parangan that by assonance might be perhaps associated to the later baldacchino, or baldachin in English, woven in Baghdad, and rewoven in Italy during the Middle Age. So in the last 60 years, these textiles with beaded randle enclosing animals have been known in the West with the name of zandaniji, a famous and precious textile that was produced in Zandana near Bukhara, Sogdiana. In 1959, Walter Henning, the German scholar of Middle Persian language, analyzed an inscription on a piece of wet face compound with a repetition of randle enclosing a pair of stags, like the one that I showed you before, which he dated to the 7th century, discovered in the Church of Notre Dame at Huy in Belgium. The inscription was identified as an archaic form of Sogdian language and tentatively translated as long 61 spans Zandaniji. The discovery was followed by an extensive description and analysis of similar textile from other European cathedrals that Dorothy Shepard, curator of textile and Near Eastern art at the Cleveland Museum of Art, divided in two groups, Zandaniji 1 and Zandaniji 2, based on the style deduced from the piece in Belgium and from another piece found in the Cathedral of Sens in France, and from there commonly accepted by the name of Zandaniji. Only in 2010, Professor Nicholas Sim Williams from London and Geoffrey Kahn from Cambridge reanalyzed the inscription, which turned out to be a 9th century form of Arabic. The textile has been also radiocarbon dated. According to Khan, the textile belonged to the commander Abar Rahman and was acquired for 38 dinars. It is true that Zandana used to produce beautiful textiles that were exported to Persia and copied in other places, but it's also true that they were made of cotton. However, we cannot exclude that due to exchanges between Sogdians and Chinese, the same textile at some points were produced also in silk. In the Hall of Ambassadors in Afrasad, Samarkand, we can see clearly Chinese bringing silk bolt and silk cocoon to the local Sogdian ruler. In the same Hall of Ambassadors, however, the man identified as Sassanian ambassador wears robes with zoomorphic figures that we can find also on textiles. So here we have the boar head, the duck, the so-called Sassanian duck with the ribbon, and the mythological Iranian simurg with the head of a dog, a winged body, lion legs, and peacock tail. So looking at the material evidence from both East and West, however, we know that Sassanian textiles were discovered and copied in Egypt. and were generally made of wool tapestry or linen, depicted narrative complex scenes such as this one where we can see an enthroned Sassanian ruler surrounded by people. A similar iconography appears also on a beautiful piece from Central Asia made with the same technique of the beaded rondels, but here the Sassanian ruler is identified as Khosrow II, who is also depicted on the Sassanian crystal cup in France called the Solomon cup. And again, Sassanian rulers riding horses that include Chinese character in the bodies, fighting animals and enclosed in beaded rondels appear in Japan, in Nara. This piece in particular is from the Oryuji, dated to the 7th century. So again, why are these textiles with rondel called Sassanian? Because they are generally associated with the Sassanian rock relief depicting hunting scenes of Takebustan in Iran. Despite the lack of written sources regarding Iranian artistic heritage and controversial ideas about this site, there is no doubt that Sassanian rock relief represented a clear landmark on the trade and military routes. And to quote Matthew Canipa, and then I open the quote, they ensured that the message of their sovereign relationship of global system of power was conveyed to all those who traveled along those routes and came across those images, end of quote. So I try to analyze every single carved pattern and compare it with similar or identical textiles. The tree of life at the two sides of the bigger arch is almost identical to those depicted on the piece in Copenhagen. In these hunting scenes carved in Takebustan, the king wears a robe with simurg, like of the type from Moshevaya Balkh in northern Caucasus, and the attendant wears a robe with flowers similar to those discovered in the Dunhuang caves. Again, the robes of the other attendants show boar head, ducks, pheasant, and also crescent, all patterns found on textile from graveyard in Xinjiang and Qinghai. Interestingly, however, not a single textile fragment of this type has been discovered so far in Iran or mainland China. We have not a single piece of fragment, but we have visual evidences. Takebustan and a tomb of the Northern Qi dynasty, dated to the 6th century. This led us to the conclusion that these textiles were indeed produced in Central Asia and then in Byzantium. The Xu Xiangxiu tomb shows a female character wearing a robe with female head and clothing in beaded rondels. A human head enclosed in a rondel is a very rare image on textile. This is particular, however, because recall the head of a bodhisattva from Shorchuk in Xinjiang, possibly suggesting an interaction with the Western regions and Buddhist belief among the northern Qin people, who, however, acquired also Zoroastrian customs, so Iranian religion customs. The only similar Central Asian fragment that I found to date shows a repetition of double beaded rondels enclosing a male bust, wearing a sort of helmet very similar to the one of the Sassanian ruler on the tapestry copied in Egypt that I previously showed. That also recalled the Iranian goddess of water, Anahita, on the back of Sassanian and Heptadid coins. Just last year, however, a German archaeological expedition discovered the remains of a Sassanian loom in Iraq. On the ground, you can see, and I circled there, small clay weights. However, this means that this type of loom is the one that I show here. I tried to find a modern similar loom to give you an idea, but this loom is not the loom that create our textiles. This is not a draw loom. This is a very simple loom. So this is not the type of loom that creates beaded rondels. Not having any Sassanian textile fragment from Sassanian territories, I believe that the creation of the beaded randle in textile come from a combination of the Sassanian coins and nomadic iconography related to the animal world that was brought or acquired in Central Asia from the Turkic populations of the northern steppes. If we look at Chinese coins, indeed, they appear very different from the Iranian type. The few portraits on possible Sassanian fragments from Egypt are generally not included in randles, and to date I have found only one Byzantine fragment with a medallion enclosing a male bust dated to the 8th or 9th century, from the Cathedral of Sens, again in France. Gold Byzantine coins called solidi, solidus is the singular, were also discovered in China. We have a total of 56 solidi from Xinjiang, Qinghai, and Ningxia, and began to be copied by the Sogdians. However, these coins were not used as money, but as decorative ornament on clothing. Byzantium began to produce silk around the 6th century, as I mentioned before, when first type of randle began to appear in the Sogdian Turfanese area. Generally, amongst Byzantine textile, we can find more hunting and complex scenes. The beaded randle, like the one that we see in the Sassanian, surrounding the Sassanian hunter from Japan with the Chinese character in the body of the horses, is generally substituted by flowers and leaves enclosing Amazons or Western featured character. These are just a few examples from different European cathedrals. But there is also another important technical detail that makes these textiles different from the Central Asian types, I mean the Byzantine and the Chinese. That Byzantine and Chinese textiles are much lighter in weight. Central Asian compounds present a sort of measurement mistake. This is a two-piece fragment from Egypt, now in Cleveland. If you look carefully, do you notice anything different? Do you notice anything weird about these textiles? If we look carefully, you will notice the two randles don't have the same length. One is wider than the other, but interestingly, the number of the warp is exactly the same in both randles. So how is it possible? Because most likely, the loom used for these textiles, this is a modern loom, but just to show you an example, didn't include a reed. The reed is this sort of comb that divides the warp equally. This means that whatever loom they use, they did it freehand. So the warp used for the randle, the number of the warps is exactly the same. But since they didn't have something to divide equally the warp, one randle is bigger than the other. And this is a common mistake in this beaded randle motif, especially from Central Asia. And again, the warp of Central Asian textiles is much thicker, giving it a sort of what I like to call pixel effect to the design. I strongly believe that this type of textile was inspired by Western and Eastern design but created in the Sogdian Turfanese area and that therefore are not Sassanian. With no doubt, the Sogdian played an important role along the Silk Road and transmitted these compounds to China. Since the import and export taxation established by the Sassanian Empire was pretty high, it is possible that the Sogdian provided Chinese or the western region of China with material and iconography that they remodeled and sold as Persian. Nevertheless, this made the Sassanian heritage to last longer, even after the fall of the Sassanian Empire in external areas such as Moshevaya Balk in northern Caucasus, where many textile fragment items and robes were discovered and dated up to the 10th century. Amongst these, the most famous green kafta with simurg that I showed you before, and an interesting small pattern which appear especially or only in this region, that is this double axe motif enclosed in a beaded randle, that most likely was an indigenous pattern that was transformed by the combination of two boar heads into an axe. And then there is Dulan in Qinghai, where there are the royal Tibetan tombs, but that preserved many different fragments, Iranian fragments, but also dated to the Han period. So before the creation of the Tibetan Empire, way before the creation of the Tibetan Empire in the, let's say, 7th century. Dulan in particular, it's important, as I said, because we can find a variety of textile, and these are some, let's say, Iranian textile from the tombs. So we have a wet face fragment with the Sassanian dak, the first golden weaving that I mentioned before, one of the first silk tapestry, in Chinese, that I will explain later, and most likely this silk tapestry came from the Iranian Gelim, created in 10,000 BCE. And again, an inscription on a fragment, a Pahlavi inscription, say King of Kings, that is a Sassanian, yes, a Sassanian or Iranian title. Generally, we know that the Tibetans were ruled for obvious climatic reasons, but we have to remember that in the 7th century, during the Tang period, they formed an alliance with the Turkic people in Xinjiang against the Chinese. And most likely, they became acknowledged with local clothing. There is one pictorial evidence of the first diplomatic encounter between Tibetans and Chinese. This is a painting from Yanli Ben that shows the Chinese Emperor Taizong giving audience to a Tibetan ambassador who is the only one wearing a patterned robe with randles and clothing a beard. Very similar to the type now in the China National Silk Museum that I analyzed a couple of years ago. Qinghai is a junction point along an external southern Silk Road that links Xinjiang and Sichuan. According to documents from Dunhuang again, Sichuan provided bamboo to build looms and other textile tools. Also, Chengdu is the capital of Sichuan that has always been, and still today, called the city of brocade. And especially during the Song dynasty, became famous for a particular type of textile called shujin, the local pattern compound, shu referring to Sichuan. Amongst the various archaeological discoveries, recently a tomb with figurines and mini looms from the Han period have been discovered in Chengdu. And these so far are the earliest evidence of patterning loom ever discovered. So I will stop here for a break, and I will continue later with the part 2. Thank you. A couple of things. So before I start with part 2, I just want to clarify that 90% of these textiles are all radiocarbon dated. So radiocarbon dating give us a range, so it's not exactly, I mean, it's quite precise. Sometimes give us 90% and very rarely 100% about the time. So that is the first thing. This is how we know it's not just related to the pattern. The textile, when possible, are radiocarbon dated. So now you have to know that when we radiocarbon dated, we need at least 2 or 3 square centimeters, because the fragment will be burned. So we will miss forever that part. So it's very hard. If we have a big fragment, we can cut a little bit of the piece from the fragment to radiocarbon dated. But when the fragment is already small, if we cut also another smaller part, we will lose the fragment forever. So this is the first thing. The second thing, someone asked me about the mummies, so I want to clarify now that the sericin, the protein of silk, as I said, we don't have a fragment. They just analyzed the soil, and they found in the tomb the protein of silk. So we suppose, we can think that there was a piece of fabric there. And then the mummy were covered, yes, with wool tapestry or wool felt. Felt doesn't require any loom, any tools. It's wool that you pound together with hot water and you dry, and then you shape. So it's very easy for nomadic people. So these are the three things, and then I will be happy to answer all your questions later on. So part two, I will focus mostly on the Mongol period. So two events really marked the decline of the Tang dynasty in Central Asia. And as I previously mentioned, the Tang dynasty is considered the golden age of China. So one is the Battle of Talas in 751 on the Talas River, where the Tang were defeated by the Arabs allied with the Turks. And the second event is the Han Lushan rebellion led by General Han Lushan of Sogdian of Turkic origin against the Tang emperor and the Tang dynasty from 755 to 763. So the Battle of Talas marked also the beginning of, somehow, of the Islamization of Central Asia. So the old textile workshops began to produce new compound according to Islamic rules. Two are the main types of garment or textile that were produced, the khila or honorific garment and the tiraz, a term that derived from Persian meaning embroidery. Now, the tiraz was used to name all the textile workshop that produce a plain compound with a printed, woven, or embroidered inscription, generally Arabic, but also Persian or Syriac. And this type of compound is very simple and spread from the Tarim to the Mediterranean basin. The earliest types survived to date are datable to the 9th century. So as we have seen, the Silk Road was not a continuous and straight road from China to the Mediterranean, but a network of roads that touch also Japan as well as North European areas. Arabs and Persians had contacts also with the Vikings. So small fragments of weft face compound, possibly from Persia, were discovered in the famous funerary ship in Hosenberg, Norway. More recently, a small fragment of silk with a silver inscription was discovered in Sweden. Professor Annika Larsson from the University of Uppsala, who analyzed the fragment, claimed the silk pattern, which were originally thought to be ordinary Viking age decoration, showed a geometric Kufic script. The news acquired great popularity also thanks to the New York Times. However, Stephanie Mulder, a professor from the University of Texas in Austin, claimed Kufic script did not occur until 5 years after the Viking Age, and that even if in Kufic the inscription embroidered into the text still doesn't mean anything in Arabic. Nevertheless, even if Islamic textile did not reach the Vikings, we know for sure, thanks to Arabic coins discovered near Stockholm, that they had contact with the Islamic world. And as I said, these are some of the 470 Arabic coins discovered there, datable between the 7th and the 9th century. Although today we know that generally Islamic culture prefers geometric composition in art rather than, for example, human beings or animals, being Central Asian too far from the central caliphate, the workshops that began to produce tiraz continued to produce older textiles as well, and slowly began to introduce Arabic inscription into the previous created composition. This became especially evident later during the Mongol period. This fragment is a good example of this stylistic encounter. Here we have a roundel with Sassanian parrots, with a circular Arabic inscription in the body, and what might be a sort of Chinese character in the center, and between the roundel a Chinese dragon. So after the Tang, China and the Western region saw the rise of various people, especially of Turco-Iranian and Turco-Mongol origins, who established kingdom and new dynasties in succession until the arrival of the Mongol in the 13th century. Apart from the Song dynasty, known as the literati period of China because of the new philosophical Neo-Confucianism movement and of new inventions, including patterning loom and textile, from the second half of the 10th century to the second half of the 12th centuries, nomadic population institutionalized themselves in northern China, from Hebei to Xinjiang. And we have the Khitans and the Jurchen peoples who established the Liao and the Jin dynasty, maintained their own costume, but also acquired Chinese traditions, a factor that laid to the groundwork for the establishment of the Mongol Empire in Eurasia. The Uyghurs in the western regions instead prefer stronger color and began to produce weft-faced compound with the use of gilded threads. The Song preferred damask compound and silk tapestry with representation of flowers and birds that were used also to frame and especially used to cover Chinese scroll paintings. The Liao adopted two styles of male robe: the official clothing, so Guofu for the Khitans, and the Hanfu, the Han clothing for the Chinese. Except for these rules, the emperor wore both types of clothing. Based on the items discovered in the last decade, the Khitan's robe, unlike that of the Chinese, was folded on the left, in the Turkic fashion, or had a collar identical to the Uyghur robe, and had very narrow sleeves and a vent on the lower part for riding. Nonetheless, some Liao textiles might be confused with Chinese Song types, which were sometimes woven with smaller medallion consisting of leaves, birds, or small animals and flowers, like those that I showed you before. Fine quality silk textiles were in fact traded by the Song merchants in exchange for Liao salt and pastoral products. As we can see looking at pictorial evidence or comparing different textiles, all these non-Chinese people shared a similar or identical textile iconography. Here we have a Liao robe with the coiled dragons, very similar to that of a Tangut prince depicted in Dunhuang. The Tangut were another population who moved to northwestern China and that established the Tangut Empire in the 11th century, and were destroyed by the Mongols a century later. Again, another type of Liao robe made with the coiled phoenixes, a motif that became very popular during the Mongols. This is a Mongol piece. This population, like most of the nomadic people, preferred and produced golden objects and textiles. A very well-preserved collection of Liao costumes is held in the Abeck Stiftung in Switzerland. This is a textile crown with golden embroidery, similar in shape to the type made of gold from one of the Liao tombs. The Jin textiles, so the Jurchen people that established the Jin dynasty in China, are amongst those that were definitely preferred by the Mongol, as I will show you later. The Jin used to produce this type of plain wave with golden brocaded pattern, generally a roundel or drop-shaped pattern made of a single animal surrounded by leaves. Many types survived in various colors. This purple one is from France, and here you can see the brocading weft on the reverse of the textiles. So this is finally our real brocade. The brocade is a textile with an extra weft that creates a pattern only in a single spot of the whole surface without touching the edges. And finally, the Uyghur, that in the 9th century established their capital in Kacha near Turfan, where Orestein, the Hungarian British archaeologist, at the beginning of last century discovered 2 shoes, 2 different ones, and not a pair, made with a special textile technique that became extremely famous amongst the Mongols, and that was recorded with the name of Nasij or Nashish in Chinese. I mentioned before that in 2012 I analyzed the Turfan textile collection at the Asian Art Museum in Berlin that was gathered during the Turfan Prussian expedition at the beginning of last century by Albert Grünwedel and Albert von Lecoq. The collection includes many Uyghur fragments, and 2 of the most important discovered in Kacha are a big Maitreya Buddha and a small fragment of Uyghur prince next to her, a small child prince here. I don't know if you can see it. There. So this compound is very interesting because it took me a while, I have to say, to analyze this fragment because it was compressed between two glass, and so it was hard to analyze. So it's made, I believe, of wet-phase compound turned 90 degrees and embroidery in silk and gilded paper thread. Now, gilded paper threads are made only by the Chinese or in Chinese territories. It's not something that we found in the West or outside China. The work is extremely refined, as you can see from the microscopic images. This is 1 square centimeter. So you can see it's small like that, and you can see what is inside. This was also a form of praying. It's a Buddhist praying, they embroidery. So used to embroider and create beautiful chain, as we will say, to use a textile term, like the twisted thread there. So I reconstructed the image according to common pictorial standards in the area. The Maitreya on the textile, although much later, is sitting in the same position of a Maitreya Buddha from the Kizil caves, like the one that Monica Zinn showed to you last Friday. And the donors really recall those from the Bezekli caves. So this is my reconstruction. I reconstruct this banner. I imagine this banner like one of the triangular banner we found in Duhuang, and we have some example also in the Turfan collections. The first Mongol Empire, so established by Genghis Khan, who unified all the nomadic tribe of Northern Asia and conquered the majority of Eurasian territories, created a new form of hegemony known, as I told you before, Pax Mongolica or Pax Tartarica, similar to the Pax Sinica created during the Han and the Tang periods, but in a large-scale territory. The larger Mongol Empire was later divided into 4 parts, ruled by the descendant of Genghis Khan. From China to the Black Sea, the empire shared a similar iconography and also similar costumes. The Mongol hegemony, however, was obtained not only by persuasion, but also by force, and was based on a decimal division system of the arming groups of 10, the Arbans, regardless of their ethnicity, religion, and culture, for a total of 10,000 people who were loyal to each other and who conquered Eurasia. The Mongol secret law, or Yasa, suppressed the ancient feudal and tribal system and helped commerce and trade and the cohabitation of all the religions. And most importantly, the Mongols established a postal system based on the old caravanserai that they call Yam. The caravanserai were the stop where merchant, trader, traveler could rest and exchange horses. So from east to west, but the Mongol established a station every 25 miles. Later this was transformed and recorded in Arabic as fonduk or in Italian as fondaco. Today we still have a few caravanserai along the Silk Road and also fondaco. So on the right, we have a caravanserai from Bukhara dated to the 10th century that is still there. And so before the Mongols. And on the left, we have before and after the restoration, the Fondaco dei Turchi in Venice, the fonduques of the Turks. That is how it appears today, in case you will go to Venice. But official and envoys could not travel in the Mongol Empire without the golden passport. The same Venetian traveler Marco Polo obtained a passport that still today is preserved in Venice. The passport could be written in Mongol, in Chinese, in Persian, and also in the quadratic script called Pakspa. Kublai Khan commissioned the Tibetan monk Pakspa, from whom the name comes from, to create a national and simplified script which the monk based on Chinese and Tibetan character. This type of script did not survive for too long, actually. So if the Uyghurs provided the Mongol with the army support, the Tibetans provided them with the spiritual support. So besides a Mongol passport, Marco Polo brought back from Asia many items and also listed in his last will that is in the Biblioteca Marciana in Venice. Allegedly, the tall medieval hairdresses that became popular in Europe were inspired by the Mongol female tall hairdresses Boktako kuku covered with refined textiles. The kuku became popular amongst all the noble ladies of the Mongol Empire, from China to Central Asia and to the Ilkhanate of Persia. But we no doubt the ladies of the Yuan dynasty, the Chinese and the bigger section of the empire, were those who used to wear golden brocade, like in this portrait of Chabi, Kublai Khan's wife, who, as we can see, wears a robe partially made with the jin brocade that I showed you before. The Mongol acquired iconography in costume made by their predecessor, and in particular preferred two types of textiles, the silk tapestry and golden weavings. This one is the largest piece of silk tapestry ever created and is in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. It is a Tibetan mandala that at the bottom includes 4 Mongol portraits. So we have Tug Temur, the great-grandson of Kublai Khan, and his old brother, and their respective consort wearing the kuku. Amongst written sources of the period in Chinese, Persian, Mongol, and also in Italian, there is one term that appears often, that is nasij or nasheshe, as I previously mentioned. The term came from the Arabic word nasaja, that literally means to weave. Most likely, the Uyghur began the production of this compound, as we have seen looking at the shoes out of culture, that was presented to Genghis Khan in 1209. In Italian sources, Mongol textiles are recorded as panni tartarici, or also tartaresco, tartarino, tarsico, nacone, nacchi, nachetti, or nasici, only from the 14th centuries onward. This can differ from the panni saracini or saracinati that were produced only in Islamic Mediterranean areas. As I mentioned at the very beginning of this lecture, it is not always easy, as you can see, match Eastern and Western written sources with the material analyzed. The nasij, the golden weaving of the Mongol, that is generally translated as tartar, refer to different type of textiles. In particular, I found, and I believe that they are the right ones, 3 types. So the first one is the jin, the brocade of the Jin dynasties, gilded silk that was created, as I told you, during the Jin dynasty, and is made of tabi and twill with a golden brocade. The second type is the nasheshe, nasij, a full decorated lampas. Lampas is a very complex structure. Generally, however, this type of nasij has the weft in cotton rather than in silk, and golden thread made of leather like in Islamic territories, so not gilded paper like in Chinese territories, and sometimes they are also twisted. Then we have another gene, just to confuse you more. The gene, as I told you at the beginning, Chinese use this word gene for everything. They do not mention the structure. That's why it's extremely important to analyze, microscopically analyze, and do not trust only written sources. The Mongol gene developed from the Tang, so the previous one that I showed you before, so in warp of weft compound that I showed you before, but with a much brighter effect, and they use also similar pattern. In addition to these three, I found that, there is another type that I believe belong to the Tartar category, that is a type of polychrome weaving classified as sadalachi, most likely developed from the original weft-faced compound twill of the 8th century in a complex lampas. An example of sadalachi might be the piece excavated in Mongolia, that can be compared with a piece in the Metropolitan Museum of Art that is believed to come from Sicily or most likely Central Asia. This in particular is interesting because the Persian scientist Jamal ad-Din in 1287 most likely was the leader of a weavers group established in Kambalik, so in Beijing, in the production of sadalachi. So not only does this clarify why the majority of Mongol structures that arrived and were reproduced in Europe were not Chinese, but also that sadalachi was the name used to categorize complex structure of double or triple set of warp and weft that most likely originated in Iranian or Central Asian territories and continues to include the so-called Sassanian pattern. Amongst the beautiful Mongol golden weavings, there is one in particular that is really spectacular, and is the golden nassage from or lampas from the Cleveland Museum of Art that indeed records one of the patterns depicted on the Muqarnas honeycomb ceiling in the Palatine Chapel in the Norman Palace of Palermo in Sicily, that however the palace is dated to the 12th century. So the ceiling is the only one of this type made of wood that has survived until today. The Palatine Chapel was created by Jewish, Christian and Muslim people together. And not coincidentally, the first textile workshop of complex silk in Italy and in Europe was established next to the royal palace and is known as the Royal Tiraz Workshop. The production of such textile, however, is confirmed also by the portrait of the Byzantine megadox or high-rank statesman Alexius Apocargos. As you can see here, he's wearing something very similar, although in a different color. So why golden textile with roundel enclosing griffin, falcon, lion, and also parrots were the most popular and have survived until today? Roundel made with interlocked rabbit instead seems to be rare on textiles, although very popular on other media. The only example again is in the Cleveland Museum of Art. The pattern can be traced back to Dunhuang, where first example dated to the 5th century appear depicted in the middle of the ceiling of a few caves. Although rare on textiles, the patterns seem to be very popular during the Mongols. It appears, just to give you some example, on the skirt of the giant Maitreyan sculpture in the Sumtsek in the monastic robe of Alchi in the western Himalayan India, on a breast tray from Iran and a pottery from Egypt or Syria, and also on a reliquary casket from southern Russia, forming golden hoard of the Mongols, and in Christian context, especially in Northern Europe. Most likely, the pattern of the 3 or 4 interlocked rabbits that was originally acquired as a variation of the Buddhist swastika, in the West it was seen as the shield of God, representing the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit during the Crusade period. We no doubt the golden weaving of the Mongol became a common accepted language in their vast empire because it contains a recognizable and recognized Eurasian iconographic patrimony. First Sicily and then Lucca in Tuscany, which became the European capital of textile during the late Middle Ages, acquired and reproduced Tartar textiles from the East. The strong influence of this compound changed stylistic and aesthetic standards among religious and noble courts in Italy. Like Buddhas and Bodhisattvas in Central Asian caves centuries before, Madonnas, saints, and angels began to be painted wearing Asian textiles. It is not a coincidence that in Tuscany a new painting school with a strong use of gold began. The Annunciation with St. Margaret and Santos by Simone Lartini and Lippo Memmi is possibly one of the most famous paintings that shows the contextualization of a Tartar textile in a sacred space. The textiles of the angel is indeed identical to 2 very similar Tartar fragments from Beijing or Central Asia. Also, the Paxpa script of the Mongol passport was reproduced in painting as decorative motif because it was believed to be a script coming from the Holy Land of the Crusades. In the Madonna and Child with saint and angels, we can clearly see the quadratic inscription as border of the Madonna's robe. The use of this script on textile, however, is also confirmed by a unique fragment in the Museum del Bargello in Florence, and today it remains the only example of this type. Tartar textiles were not only depicted but also found in churches and cathedrals. Like in the Buddhist context of Dunhuang and Turfan, Christian treasures were indeed enriched by gift from the believers in exchange for indulgence. The majority of textiles in Italian or European collection that come from Asia and are datable to between the 13th and 14th centuries are Central Asian or Western Asian. Nevertheless, only a few can be identified as possibly Chinese. An example is the mitre of the Bishop of Done da Colonna. This floral pattern inside also records the type used for the dalmatic found in St. Nicholas Church in Stralsund in Germany, which includes Chinese character dated to the same period. Today, many of these vestments appears as a patchwork constructed over time in a cut and paste process of different types of weaving of Asian and non-Asian origin. In the 20th centuries, in fact, there was the habit of cutting liturgical vestment into smaller pieces to make sacred relics to worship. This explains the large number of textile fragments preserved in museums worldwide, and also the recycling process of old and new weaving in the recreation of liturgical vestment, like the dalmatic of Pope Benedict XI in Perugia, that most likely was originally made with textile from the papal treasury. By contrast, the regalia of Can Grande Primo della Scala, discovered in his tomb in Verona in 1921, which for structure and styles appear very similar to the compounds that composed the dalmatic of Benedict XI, was found intact as originally assembled. Without context, this remained one of the most important discoveries of the last century in Italy. The regalia of Can Grande includes various types of textiles, among which also lampas with foliage and small animals that as the 2 I previously showed, is very similar to the mantle of the angel by Lippo Memmi and Simone Martini. The textile imagery that I have presented today and that crossed the Silk Road had an enduring impact in enabling Eurasian social and cultural life. The Tarim Basin and the Mediterranean Basin work similarly in the absorption of artistic flows and their adaptation in their own current. However, it is a multiple use of similar or identical Sino-Iranian patterns with a strong Turk-Iranian matrix on different media that can contextualize the idea of the Central Asian textile imagery. Central Asia indeed worked as an art and a craft factory, which located in the middle of the Silk Road was receptive to the encounter of ethnic and cultural groups that often recycle not only material, but also styles, if not ideas, of religion and faith. The patronization of images happened first through the movement of Eurasian nomads and semi-nomads that interacted with sedentary people along north-south routes, and then those of merchants who, as middlemen between empires, transferred cultural ideas along east-west routes. Without a doubt, Turco-Mongol people who did not produce silk took advantage of their movement and exchanged both with the Chinese and the Iranians, trading cotton and horses that transferred silk to the West. Inevitably, original meanings were lost in the transmission of material that was often accompanied with oral rather than written description and instructions, because they were also sometimes created beyond the official circuit of production. The analysis of surviving written texts confirmed 40 transliteration of terms and various identification of a single design or technique. Nevertheless, the comparison between visual sources did not deny uniformity in the employment of a common textile imagery that has become a shared Eurasian human heritage. While silk was extremely valuable in the early Middle Ages, in the late period when it was interwoven with gold or silver threads, it became even more appreciated, surpassing the meaning of the decorative motif acquired from external areas. Thank you very much.